The world needs heroes. Individuals with the drive and talent to rise above all others. Using sheer force of will to change what's possible. But at Swift, we know every success story has a team behind the scenes. Because for the last 50 years, we've been supporting your success stories, keeping the world connected across more than 200 countries, delivering with excellence built on trust, giving you the latest tools to make transactions instant and frictionless, helping value flow where it's needed, and innovating as technology and society changes. We're making finance a simple, seamless, and standardized part of our lives, and keeping complexity behind the scenes. So whatever your next challenge, we'll be here for you. Whether that's financing global enterprise or helping small businesses thrive. Because with best-in-class infrastructure, we are your support team, helping you achieve the heroics that move our industry forward. Swift, shaping the future of finance together.
Hello and welcome to everyone joining us today. My name is Tom Dunbar and I lead Swift's market infrastructure programs. Today we will be navigating the future of ISO 20022 and the critical role played by high-value payment systems and central banks. ISO 20022 is the new payments data for global payments. It is a means for positive change, and central banks are one of the key drivers of that real-world change. We know that ISO 20022 is now very much well on its way. But as we will explore today, there is a long way to go, and we are now at a very critical juncture in time. We know many of the world's largest economies have enabled ISO 20022, but the majority of the world's payment systems are still on that journey. To put that into numbers, 70% of payments traffic on Swift connected payment systems are already using ISO 20022. However, we still have nearly 80% of payment systems yet to go live with ISO. So that is a really long tail, which leaves us with a big opportunity and a real risk for harmonization. So today, we're going to first dive into and share some lessons learned from enabling ISO 20022 on payment systems. We will then spend some time discussing the second challenge, which is looking forward to central banks and payment systems really start to enrich ISO 20022 payment messages, whilst also ensuring the second challenge, which is how the global community enables positive change in a harmonized way. This is a really, truly global and complex challenge that will have material impacts on both banks and payment service users. In the meantime, for all of you joining, please use the chat function to put forward any questions or remarks, and we will be sure to try and pick these up at the end. But without further ado, I'm now going to allow our experts to introduce themselves. Those experts who are at the front line of change, Christine and Mel, welcome. Christine, let's start with an introduction from you.
Thank you, Tom. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank Swift for giving me this opportunity to share our experience on the ISO 222 migration journey. My name is Christine Orina. I'm a banker by profession. I have 17 years banking experience, 15 years in the commercial bank, and 2 years as a regulator in the Central Bank of Kenya. My experience in the commercial bank was on the payments operations department. I also headed the treasury operations, trade operations, document and securities operations departments, and cash monitoring units departments in the commercial bank. Currently, I'm at the Central Bank of Kenya. I'm in the Banking and Payments Department, Digital Payments Division, and I head the SWIFT section. Currently, I'm also spearheading the ISO 222 program at the Central Bank of Kenya, both for the cross-border and the RTGS, and also leading the Kenyan industry on the RTGS ISO 222 migration in Kenya. I have a degree and a master's in business administration finance, and I'm currently pursuing my doctorate in business administration. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Christine. A lot of experience and expertise, which I hope we can dive into. Now, Mel, over to you. Could you introduce yourself and perhaps explain for those who don't know a little bit about the role of the High Value Payment System Plus working group?
No problem. Thanks, Tom. And thank you guys for today. So I am the program manager leading the Australian migration of the high value system to ISO 20022. I'm also the change management lead for HPS Plus. And HPS Plus provides a usage guideline template for MIs to implement ISO 20022 within their own high value payment systems. So we're really looking to support MIs on this. It's industry-led, we're supported by Swift, and we have members covering 16 MIs, including some of the world's major markets. We have a strong interplay with CBPR Plus, but where CBPR Plus provides an implementation of ISO 20022, just like our MIs, HPS Plus is a template, so it's kind of a layer above that. And our MIs will use that template. The whole purpose of this is to enable harmonization and interoperability across the board. So we want to make sure that MIs have a similar starting point or a baseline that they can all use and then plug in their local requirements.
Thank you, Mel. Yeah, a lot to dive into there, particularly both on the Australian side, but also looking at how we're looking forward to that harmonization challenge, which HPS Plus is trying to manage. But I want to come back to that, but actually start off really from the basics and to start off what the ISO 20022 journey means for us. And Christy, I think you're really well placed to start that conversation, which is, can you just tell us a bit about why are we having this conversation? Why and how are you choosing to implement ISO 20022?
So I'll start with the why. And the why is because there are so many benefits that are related to implementing ISO 222. I think one of the benefits is the standardization and interoperability. We are implementing ISO 222 to take advantage of the standardized messaging format. This format enhances interoperability between different financial institutions and systems globally. Number two, we are also looking at the data richness that is there, and this is on the structured data compared to the old standards. So the empty standards did not have structured data, but for the ISO 222, we have structured data that is really rich with a lot of information. It has detailed information that can be transmitted to for each transaction. This helps improve at least accuracy and efficiency of payment reporting. The other thing also, the other benefit is just on the regulatory compliance, and that is why we are also implementing the ISO 222. So we want to, the ISO 222 a global message. So we want to ensure that we comply to the evolving regulatory requirements and align ourselves as an industry to the industry-wide mandates of standardized messaging formats and ensure that we remain compliant globally. And then maybe the last reason as to why is operational efficiency. Currently, we do have a lot of errors that emanate from empty standards and a lot of rework that has to happen with the empty standards. But with the ISO 222, we actually looking at reduced errors, lowering the operational costs, and minimizing the need to have manual intervention and reconciliation. So how are we doing it from the Kenyan perspective? What we did, and maybe just to give you a little bit of our journey, is that we started with assessment and the planning. With the assistance of Swift, we assessed our back office system. With the assistance of Swift, we did assessment of our back office system, and that is the IT infrastructure. And then we came up with a gap analysis. So with this gap analysis, we're able to establish the gaps that we do have between the ISO 222 migration that we are currently in and the empty standards. And then after doing the assessment and establishing where the gaps were, we then involved stakeholders. So we ensure that the vendors, the internal teams within Central Bank of Kenya, the industry as a whole, we were at least in the same page. So we held workshops and training sessions that had helped us ensure that we are talking on one page with the industry and with everyone else, including our vendors. before we progressed. Then what we did as Kenya, we also shared what we call my standards. So we procured the IAP, and that is the ISO accelerator package from Swift. This was very helpful because already we didn't have to start from scratch with the ISO 222 messages. The ISO accelerator package already had the ISO messages in them. All we had to do is just tweak to ensure that at least they are fit for the Kenyan environment. So once we tweaked them to fit the Central Bank of Kenya environment, we then went ahead and shared the same with the industry. On sharing the standards with the industry and taking through what we expected of them from central bank perspective, we then requested them to proceed and ensure that they were testing this, they were sharing with their vendors, and from the vendor perspective, ensuring that they are cooperating and aligning themselves with the ISO 222 standards that we had already informed them to do that. So this was done in a period of around 6 months. And then currently we are actually testing. We started with testing whether the messages were valid. And then now we actually flew full blown with the UAT testing. We are actually at an advanced stage in terms of testing. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine. There's a lot to dive into there. I think one of the reflections I'll make is there's kind of two big things. One is trying as the Central Bank of Kenya, like many other MIs, implementing changes locally to meet certain policy objectives, but also using ISO as a global initiative to support that end-to-end journey where we have sort of harmonization across one standard, which, let's face it, is going to be a lot richer, a lot more structured than MT. And actually, you mentioned kind of the solutions that you're using. A lot of those go back and are actually based on HPS Plus, that kind of market organized approach to harmonizing how we implement a flavor of ISO 20022. So I think we can really dive into that in a second. And I guess just one more reflection from you, Christine, before we move on. I know there are a number of payment systems and central banks listening into this. What are the sort of one or two key learnings that you've taken from your journey so far, given that you're now so far down the line and in the advanced stage of testing? What are those one or two learnings that you can share with our audience?
If you allow me, I'll share about three. Number one is the effective communication and collaboration. This is very essential with the stakeholders, with the vendors, with the industry. Very important to have an effective communication and collaborations. And then also comprehensive training and education. So we were hoping, and we still hope to have a lot of trainings because the ISO message is very complex. And if you do not have continuous training and workshops with the industry and with the vendors, you end up really having a lot of frustration. And third but not least is the collaboration with the industry peers. So we did a lot of peer learning with South Africa, this Bank of England with the South African Reserve Bank and Bank of England that really came in handy for us, and including Bank of Zambia. So there's a lot of learnings that we also are getting from our peers who have been able to help us throughout the journey and just to make it easier.
Thank you, Christina. A story of true collaboration as we move forward. Mel, just now looking to you, and really, are you able to share some of the experience you've had from the Australian market, given you're choosing a slightly different approach with the coexistence of MT? Can you share where you are now and what the next couple of years are going to look like for the market?
Yeah, definitely. So we went live in March of 2023 with a mandate to receive only and to on send for intermediaries. So that gave our participants the flexibility. So similar to CBPR Plus, we then entered a coexistence period. However, different to CBPR Plus, we entered what's called a managed coexistence. So we grouped participants into test and implementation windows depending on their individual timelines. And that really helped us hold our participants to account and make sure that we're meeting the timelines that we need to meet. So since March of 2023, 3 of our 4 implementation groups have now gone live. The last group will go live in September of 2024, so this year. And after September, we're actually restricting the use of MT. So our end of coexistence in Australia actually finishes in September. We have one use case, of course, and that is the on-send of incoming cross-border MTs. But that will be the only use case actually allowed in Australia. So we're quite confident that by the end of this year, we'll have 100% traffic in MX being initiated in MX in Australia. We've seen about half of our participants go live. So across those first 3 groups, we've seen about half of our participants now complete all of their go live for functionality. But interestingly, those participants who are fully certified now with all of their functionality have not necessarily moved all of their volumes across. So some of those participants, even though they're fully certified, they're still only doing 50% of their volume. So we're actually working with them now in a program to find out what are the drivers behind that? Why haven't they moved all the way across? Is there some sort of external factor in that? What can we do to help them? Because we do have that kind of hard line approach that by the end of September, all traffic needs to be in MX. So it'll be an interesting couple of months as we sort of work through that and work through the data. But at the moment, about 50% of our volume is in MX. And that's been slowly or incrementally increasing as each group goes live. So it'll be an interesting time, I guess. In terms of harmonization, we have seen our participants really, it's become so apparent the importance of harmonization. And I say that because when we first went live, there was a lot of excitement, or maybe even before we went live, when we first started planning this program, there was a lot of excitement about the control and the power that we now have as an MI to create our own bespoke set of messages. And at the time, we maybe didn't put enough importance on harmonization and interoperability. We knew it was important that we were interoperable with CBPR Plus, but even so, we still didn't place enough importance on that. And now, as we're going live and we're starting planning for our UG 2025, this is the first upgrade of our spec that'll happen in November of 2025. We've very much realized the error there. And we now have this huge focus. Now, interoperability and harmonization is our number one criteria for any change that we do. So definitely extremely important, a very timely conversation about harmonization and interoperability.
Yeah, and I think it's that sort of 18 months to go until we see the end of coexistence on cross-border payments, and a lot of MIs are using that as a marker because of that cross-border impact that you have. So it's a really interesting and very topical time to really start discussing it. And as I mentioned at the beginning, we still have a lot of MIs to go, and although they're smaller, I think it raises the harmonization bar even still. So a really good time to talk about that. Before I then kind of lead back into sort of what some of the work you're doing in the collaborative space, Mel, Christine, I have one more question for you really on the topic of harmonization, which is kind of how do you see the challenge for your participants with harmonization? What's the challenges that they're having to face across jurisdictions?
Tom, maybe first and foremost, I'd like to emphasize the enriching of ISO 222 message is a strategic move for us to leverage on the full potential of the standards. Now, moving to the challenges, I think one of the challenges is diverse regulatory requirements. It's a main challenge because we have various jurisdictions requiring different regulatory requirements. So each country may have specific mandates on the type of and format of information required in the payment messaging. Therefore, harmonizing these requirements actually while maintaining enriched data can be very complex. And then the second thing is on the technical and operational differences. Different jurisdictions may have varying levels of technical infrastructure and operational practices. So ensuring seamless interoperability between these systems requires significant effort in terms of standardizing message formats and protocols. And then lastly, I think stakeholder coordination. That's a very big one. For us to achieve harmonization, there's need for close coordination with various stakeholders, including banks, financial institutions, and regulatory bodies in different jurisdictions. So the regular communication and collaborations are key to overcoming these challenges.
Yeah, and I guess that point of collaboration is really interesting because we have different
Yeah.
communities. We have our domestic community. I say we as MIs, domestic community, but then there's the sort of community of MIs which also needs to incorporate the respective participants within those. So I think it's really a very, as I said, a very topical point in time to discuss this. Um, and I would reflect that actually if we may go live on day one with a beautifully harmonized version of ISO across
Yeah.
multiple different jurisdictions. But I think the real challenge is actually taking that a step further and how do we ensure that we constantly change, meet and evolve future requirements of ISO? How do we adapt to new versions and make sure that we do that all in one step? I think it's fair to summarize that that is one of the main objectives of the high value payment systems plus HPS Plus working group now. Are you able to share a bit more about an extension of what you've already said, what's going on there, and actually perhaps some of your ambitions to make it more visible to more MIs as more MIs now start to look and get closer to their go live dates for ISO?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's two things here. The first one is you are 100% right. We have a lot of different MIs on differing journeys on their way to ISO 20022 implementation. And I think there's a lot of we need to reset a lot of expectations kind of globally and not just with MIs, but across banks and across all of our stakeholders within the chain that migrating the process doesn't end at migration or that the journey doesn't end at migration. The journey starts at migration. And so from that point, we now need to expect a period of transition, call it, as we move from migration programs and into BAU. But that doesn't happen overnight. So you don't. I don't think the industry will get to a point where we're all migrated and then just like that we're into BAU. There has to be this period of transition as we as the standard evolves, as we fix errors, as we all start using it, we start to realize some of the ways that we've erred. And so for Australia, that might be that we've realized the importance of interoperability and harmonization. So we're going to move back. And for HPS Plus, to be really honest, like that's one of our biggest work items at the moment is making sure that we are fully synthesized with CDPR Plus and where possible that those the template and the implementation are currently interoperable because if our MIs or if any other MI that wants to use HPS Plus is implementing HPS Plus, we want that to be seamless and we want them to be able to implement HPS Plus with the expectation or assumption that HPS Plus has taken care of cross-border interoperability. That's not something that as an MI I have to now worry about. As an MI, I can focus on local requirements, knowing that HPS Plus has got the interoperability piece sorted out. So there's a lot that we're doing in that space. In terms of becoming more visible, we have been creating, we've got a new web page, we have a LinkedIn page. One of the things that we've discussed as an approach within HPS Plus is that previously or up until recently, HPS Plus almost worked in the background and the changes would filter through organizations and through conversation and eventually the information would disseminate out. What we're now taking the approach of is a lot more transparency and a lot more direct contact. So we have the website, we have the LinkedIn group, so that users, vendors, banks, MIs, anyone who is interested in HPS Plus and is following the HPS Plus journey can get their hands on those documents immediately and directly and they have a direct contact in there. We're not waiting for this kind of daisy chain of conversation to happen. So we think that that is going to be really important as we all manage the challenge of timelines now, because with interoperability comes aligned change management timelines. So we can't have too many markets that speed ahead and go ahead and implement future base message versions, and then we have other markets that are left behind. So we know that we're going to have to start working on aligning change management processes and change management timelines. And as part of that, it's making sure that all of the participants have enough time to actually implement according to those timelines.
Yeah, and of course, I guess one of the other sort of additional reflections to make is, we have multiple market practices for different communities. So we're talking today about RTGS MIs and the high value payment system space. But actually, not all high value payment systems originate as such. And cross border payments will often touch different and increasingly different types of payment systems. So I guess you have that challenge also of how do different market practices update and transform over time, not just the high value space as well. And actually, that leads me quite neatly, if I can, to one of the questions. So we're starting to get a few questions in from the audience. So I'm going to ask, first I'm going to start with Christine, actually. So kind of linking to that kind of ISO journey, we've got a question on, is the ISO 20022 standard implementation applicable to local banks only? Or will it be extended to other low-value payment ecosystems using NBFI, MFIs, SACCOs, Safaricom, M-Pesa, etc.? So I think it's a question specifically to Kenya, but I guess what's the kind of mood locally, not just at the high-value payment space, but for more local domestic payment systems and wallets to adopt ISO 20022?
So we do have some of our low value payment system already adopting the ISO 222 standards. And currently we are focusing on the large value payments because it's a very big change for the large value payments and there are a lot of risks involved in it. So yes, Kenya will move to other payments will definitely get involved in terms of moving to ISO 222 standards for harmonization purposes. But for now, we are concentrating on the large value payments.
Yeah, I think that's actually a reflection that it's quite timely for high value payments. I can speak on behalf of the UK and other domestic systems where we've seen that as well, and actually Australia, where Australia is probably a bit of an exception in that regard, going ahead with ISO. But absolutely, I think moving the high value seems to be the trend at the moment, but others are following. Just one more quick question, and perhaps it's an interesting one for you, Mel, because given that Australia has a slightly unique governance arrangements over the different bodies, and you sort of have roles and responsibilities delegated to you by the Reserve Bank of Australia, have you come across the challenge of kind of managing IT budgets within banks? So I think the question really is alluding to banks spend their money on day-to-day operations, day-to-day activities, run the bank operations. How do you have a conversation within industry that tries to push something for a more widespread transformational change, which has a more network and longer-term benefit? Is that a conversation you've had within your market?
Look, we were quite fortunate within Australia. Our migration program was supported by a mandate from our Reserve Bank, and that mandate, granted, was based on industry consultation. So I think there were 3 rounds of industry consultation back across 2018 and 19. And then at the conclusion of that, the Reserve Bank put out a conclusions paper that said, after extensive consultation, this is the direction that the industry will head. And part of that, so I work for Australian Payments Network, which is the member or industry body for regulation of payments in Australia. And so what we do is we run the clearing system. So while we don't have any infrastructure, the RTGS sits with the Reserve Bank. We are the administrators of our closed user group, and we also run the procedures or the rule books for the high value clearing system in Australia. So what that meant is we had this really quite directive mandate from the Reserve Bank, which gave us, I guess, the incentive and the big stick. So we didn't have to have a lot of those conversations because it became a compliance conversation rather than an industry. This is for the betterment of the industry. It was more on that compliance side.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think there's a common theme of collaboration, perhaps a key word for us to take away. Both of you have alluded to the importance of bringing people on that journey, understanding the pace they can move at and moving together. And I think that's really the theme of what we're touching upon today. we are going to wrap up shortly, and I'll ask for some closing comments. But one thing I just wanted to allude to is I know in the questions we've had some things around sort of benefits of ISO, how to implement, what's it mean, and actually there's plenty of resources on the internet, including on swift.com. I know you can download, I think it's called ISO 2082 for Dummies, but there's also more information around why ISO matters, how to implement. And I know Christine, the Central Bank of Kenya, and AusPayNet and your community in Australia have similar publications. So I would refer you to go online, including on swift.com, to learn a bit more about answering those questions on ISO. And perhaps we could do another session another time to deep dive into those. But really now, just to kind of close up and start to wrap up the session, I wanted to kind of just give the audience a bit of a gift, if you like, and one sort of key takeaway from you each. So I'll start with Mel and then Christine. Could you share with us and those listening to us, what is your sort of key lesson, key takeaway that you want the audience to take away from today?
Look, at the risk of repeating you, Tom, I think collaboration is just such a huge and broad topic, but I would say collaboration, like none of this can happen in isolation. And that is on so many levels. It has to be collaboration between participants within a market, but then it also has to be collaborations across the markets. And so, it's at every level that we need that really highly engaged level of coordination and collaboration, because none of this can happen in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, couldn't agree more as one of the real key takeaways from today. And Christine, is there anything you can share with the audience?
I want you to say what Mel said, but maybe let me add. I think
Naturally.
ISO 222 is more than a technical change. It's actually a strategic move for global interoperability. So apart from the collaboration part, we just need to see that it's not a technical change anymore. It's more of a strategic move. And I think it's really good for all the financial institutions to just get into this strategic move for our own success and harmonization. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Christine. And then one final thing for me to wrap up with as a key takeaway. An additional point really is that actually we've talked a lot about ISO over the last few years really, and we're starting to see it materialize, particularly in the big economies. But actually we're still very much at the beginning of the ISO journey. We just need to get onto ISO, and then we can start to move in step and start to enrich and structure our data of the payment messages. We'll bring all those lovely, brilliant real world benefits which we so often talk about and will realize. And in that context, I think the one takeaway for me is there is this long tail to come. We have many payment systems that are yet to go live with ISO. And now really is the time, it's a really critical time for those who are looking to engage in the topic to start looking at the challenges of harmonization. I think HPS Plus is one of the good, clear vehicles where industry is organizing itself. But like I say, there's plenty online to begin discovering and engaging increasingly in that topic. So really, that's everything from us today. A really, really rich discussion. I want to thank you both, Mel and Christine, for your expertise and enthusiasm over a topic which we know we've all been engaged in for years, but actually we're starting to see benefits and fruition from. And to you, the audience, thank you again for joining us. We hope you continue in joining us on the conversation. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Tom.
Bye.